That's why Peter says, look, you need to arm yourself with the same attitude as Jesus. Jesus understood that his role was to suffer. What if Jesus would have been afraid to suffer? Did you ever think about that? What if Jesus was afraid to suffer? What if Jesus made his decisions while he was on earth in such a way as to avoid suffering? That kind of changes things for us a little bit, wouldn't it? You see, if Jesus chooses not to suffer, there's no payment for our sins. There's no way for me to have a relationship with God. There's no way for me to look forward to an eternity with God the way life is meant to be. There's none of that. Because if Jesus chooses to avoid suffering, he doesn't do anything. He probably doesn't even come to earth. Jesus' attitude towards suffering was this: in order for me to accomplish what I am here to do, I must suffer. And therefore, although I don't relish the thought, he certainly didn't. He prayed, Father, if it's possible, take this away. But Jesus said, even though I don't relish the thought of suffering, I don't look forward to the thought of suffering, I don't desire to suffer, I will not be afraid to suffer. And I will not allow fear of suffering to keep me from doing what I am called to do. And Peter says, you take the same attitude as Jesus. If you're going to live life as a Christ follower, if you're going to live your life as Jesus has called you to live it, you will suffer. But even though you don't look forward to that suffering, even though you don't relish that suffering, even though you don't desire that suffering, you cannot allow fear of suffering to keep you from doing what you are called to do. And those are very easy words to say. And very difficult words to live. My personality is not one that lends itself to being swayed by peer pressure. It's not who I am. Some people struggle with that. I have my own struggles. That doesn't happen to be one of them. You know what? I still am afraid to suffer. And you know what kind of suffering I'm most afraid of? The exact kind of suffering we're talking about here. Social vilification. You know what I really don't want to happen? I don't want my friends to turn on me. And probably you feel the same way. None of us want to lose a friendship. None of us want to be abused by friends. And so as a result, what do? Well, I'm very hesitant to tell my friends that they're sinners. I just don't think they'd take that well. And when I choose to not tell my friends that they're sinners, what have I done? I have allowed my fear of suffering to keep me from doing what I'm called to do. When I find myself in a setting where I know that I am either being a part of or doing something that's dishonoring to God, but I choose to kind of just quietly be there and not say anything. Why do I do that? Because I'm afraid of suffering. You know what? We're not going to be thrown to the lions. That's just not going to happen to us. We're not going to be covered with oil and burned to light up Nero's parties. That's not the kind of suffering that we worry about. But we are scared to death to do something that might offend someone that we like. Even if that means not doing what we're called to do. Do you know what causes that? It's the mirror. It's because what I see in all these situations is I see what's good for me, or what I perceive to be good for me, and I don't stop to think about what's good for anybody else. And here's the kicker. If I knew that the person who worked next to me, or lived next to me, or fill in the blank, if I knew that that person was going to die in 48 hours, and I had the ability to save them, what would I do to save that person? Would I risk our friendship? Would I risk offending them? Would I say something to them that they might not like? Would I take the chance that maybe everybody around might laugh at me? I think I probably would. And I think that's probably the case. It's not necessarily 48 hours, but it's coming. I recently saw the movie Evan Almighty with my family, and some of you may have seen that. It's kind of a modern day retelling of the Noah story. It's the first time that I can ever remember sitting in a movie that was a comedy and being under extreme conviction about the way I live my life based on the contents of the movie. To understand the story, you got this guy Evan, who's a brand new congressman, and he is completely and totally self-obsessed. In fact, in the movie, they use a mirror to show us this. He spends probably a half an hour in front of the mirror on his first day of work, making sure that absolutely everything about him looks perfect. He shaves like 6 times. He's plucking hairs. He's checking every hair to make sure. I mean, he is obsessed with himself. And as a result of his being self-obsessed, he's very inconsiderate to others. He has no idea of what's going on. Everything's about Evan. But then God intervenes. And God gives Evan a message that Evan says, no, absolutely not. I will not do that. I will not say that. Because that would reflect very poorly on me. Thank you very much. And so Evan tries to avoid becoming God's prophet. Why? Because he wants to avoid the suffering that it would bring. He knows that if he does what God is telling him to do, the results will be very, very bad for Evan. He'll lose his job, he'll lose his friends, he'll lose his career, he'll lose his status, he may lose his family, and he doesn't want that. He doesn't want to suffer.